Welcome to the Puzzle of Us. I'm your host, Chelsea Petersen, owner and clinical director of Cache Valley Counseling. I am very excited today to have Emily Guarnotta on our podcast today. I'm very excited to have her. I'm going to do a little introduction of her, and then she's going to tell us a little bit more about herself. She is an online therapy practice specializing in helping mothers and fathers cope with challenges of parenting. She is a licensed clinical psychologist and holds a doctorate in clinical psychology from California School of Professional Psychology in San Diego, California. My experiences include working in local community mental health clinics, outpatient and residential addiction treatment centers, and with children and parents in school settings. She has also completed additional training in perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, perinatal grief and loss, mental health and integrative medicine, and mindfulness-based stress reduction. I have served clients via telehealth in New York, South Carolina, and Florida, and also supervise all of the therapists on our team. And she's also got some new exciting things going on, which she's also going to tell us a little bit more about. So welcome, Emily. I'm so excited to pick your brain and share your knowledge with all of our listeners today.
Hi, Chelsea. Thank you so much for having me. That was a great introduction. I also am excited to mention that I am also in the process of launching a new therapy practice called Phoenix Health, which will serve mothers that are dealing with perinatal mood and anxiety disorders like prenatal and postpartum depression and anxiety, as well as infertility and miscarriage and pregnancy loss. All online virtually. So it'll be very convenient and accessible. And we're going to be launching in New York in the spring of 2024. So hopefully very soon.
Very cool. That's so exciting and such a much needed area of expertise, because there is, even in my own practice, the loss, whether it be from miscarriage or an early term birth, or even just the loss from not being able to have children and through IVF or various things like that, is something that I see so regularly. And to have, really niche expertise of people who do this and work with this and see this really on a daily basis is just so key. So it's very good work that you're doing and much needed. So thank you for all of your work.
Well, thank you. I mean, I think it's a team effort because we work with individuals, but it's a family. Often it's a family issue. It's a family concern. So it's great that there are practices like yours out there that are serving couples, that are serving families. Like we all we need to tackle it from a lot of different angles. So I think that's the beauty of us all kind of working well together.
Yes. And it's different for husbands or partners, and it's how to be supportive and how to show love and concern. And I'm dealing with my own things, but how do we talk about it? There's a lot of layers to even this one aspect of the life phase, right? And it definitely is multifaceted. So yeah. Well, tell me what inspired you to focus on the relationship dynamics of couples transitioning to parenthood.
Well, when I first started working with perinatal parents or perinatal mothers, and when I use the word perinatal, I know it's a clinical term, so it sounds very jargony, but it basically means any person who's between that trying to conceive stage and those early years of parenting or postpartum, a little bit beyond postpartum. So when I started working in my practice with moms who were coming in with the baby blues or postpartum depression and anxiety, we would start getting into that. And then it would become very apparent that the impact of these symptoms on their relationship with their partners was becoming a problem. And that even in some cases, their partners were kind of almost feeding into their symptoms. Like these mothers would come in experiencing depression or anxiety, and their partners maybe didn't understand what was going on, or would respond in a way that the mother didn't perceive as so helpful. And then that would kind of worsen what she was already going through. So I started seeing these dynamics happen. And it became apparent that that's really an important part of the treatment, is working through how these different conditions affect not only the mother, but the couple.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And it is the whole perinatal process between getting pregnant and or not being able to get pregnant and all the hormones that go with that, as well as once you are pregnant and all the hormonal changes and fluctuations in pregnancy. And then of course, most people know about the baby blues after, and the depression that some people experience. And it can be a lot for the mother to go through, but it can also be a lot for the families and dynamics and relationships as well. It's and people can get stuck. Unfortunately, I've seen people, years later, no longer having baby blues, but they've kind of gotten stuck in those patterns of responding to each other, and that really started postpartum, after babies were born, that aren't really helpful. So it's a great process of being able to support the family and the relationship, because it does become a relationship dynamic. How do you typically begin your work with new or expectant patients or parents? And is that usually just one person, or how do people find you? Is it the woman seeking help, or is it both together? What's kind of your process with that?
I would say the majority of the time it's the mother reaching out. Sometimes it'll be the father reaching out on behalf of the mother, trying to help ease some of the burden on her by getting her set up with a therapist. I'm primarily an individual therapist, so I do work a bit differently than you probably do in your practice, where I might have the mother come in and we'll be supporting her and working on some things, and then it'll become apparent that the relationship dynamics are becoming a problem, or the communication within that relationship. And when I start noticing that happens, we might invite the partner to come in for a couple of sessions so that we can work on that specific issue. And at that point, if it seems like the couple needs more ongoing support, then I'll refer them out for couples therapy, and I'll continue seeing the mother. But I also do have fathers that come in. Something that a lot of people don't know is that non-birthing partners, whether that's fathers or LGBTQ parents, even adopted parents, can experience postpartum depression. The rates for fathers are at about 10%. So 1 in 10 dads can experience postpartum depression. So they're also coming in saying that they're not feeling themselves after having a baby. So, and then that process can look similar, where I start working with the non-birthing parent and it becomes obvious that the couple needs a little bit more support. So I might invite the other parent in for a session and then make that judgment call if they need a referral to ongoing couples therapy.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, I think it's great to put that out there too, because there is, again, as we've talked about, dynamics and bringing children into this world and beginning the parenting journey. It is a relationship dynamic, and it's not just one person. There are lots of people who are affected by this, and it's great that, again, you're aware of that and you can be there to support them, and however they're finding you, however they're reaching out, there's a good assessment going on of, do we just need to work with the individual? Is this becoming a couple dynamic? And so people shouldn't be surprised if you're like, oh, this is kind of affecting your relationship. Let's bring you in and let's talk about this. And really, again, there's a lot of layers to this. And so it's great that it sounds like your assessment is assessing all of those different layers and getting them help in all of those areas that they need. What can you share? Can you share a common misconception that couples have about parenthood before they begin to experience it?
The biggest misconception is that a lot of parents underestimate how difficult it's going to be. We hear, before you become a parent, you hear it's really hard, it's really challenging, it's the hardest thing that you're going to do. But until you're really in it, it's really hard to conceptualize what that's going to be like, how you're going to feel day to day, how dramatically your life is going to change overnight. So I think that's just the biggest thing, is that people aren't prepared for just how hard it is.
Absolutely.
And of course, how much it's going to affect every single area of their life, from their relationship to their friendships, to their work, to their sleep, to their health, just everything. It impacts everything.
Yeah, yeah, it does. And on a personal note, I think for me, we have 4 children, and a lot of my friends have, multiple children, and we've kind of talked about which transitions were harder for them. And a lot of them is from like 1 to 2 or 2 to 3, right? Like we no longer do the transition from 2 children to 3 children was really hard. But for me, it is exactly what you're saying. It was from going from no kids to 1 kid. And then it's just become, well, let's add one more to the man. So, um, but that transition from 0 to 1 was really difficult. Everything changes. Your relationship changes, the dynamics. You can't just pick up and go on a whim anymore. It's very much, you go from what do I need to get done to your life really revolving around this child who needs you all the time. And that was probably one of the most difficult transitions for me. And I experienced that with other people as well, saying that that's a difficult transition. So,
Absolutely. I mean, and as a couple, as a household, you kind of have a system, a way of running. And pre-kids, especially if you've been together for a period of time, several years, you probably have, just a way that the system works. And then overnight, that system needs to be completely reworked and rechanged. And it's a lot. It's very disorienting. And it's hard to explain that to someone before they have children. It's kind of one of those things people can tell you all day, but until you're really in it, it's really hard to understand what that's going to feel like.
yeah, absolutely. Could not agree more. The sleepless nights, and people saying like, well, as long as you can get sleep. I don't think I really knew what that meant until having children, right? Like, oh yeah, I'll be fine, right? And it's different when you have kids, and it's something that you kind of have to experience, and you can try to be prepped for it, but knowing that it is going to be a trend, there is going to be a transition period for sure, can be really helpful. So
Yeah.
um, why do you think it's so important to discuss the impact of having a baby on a couple's relationship?
I think it's really important because the more you talk about it, the more prepared you can be. Like we mentioned, you can never be 100% ready or 100% prepared. But if we can talk more about how having a baby affects a marriage, affects a relationship, then couples won't feel so disoriented or so alone when they're going through it, or maybe won't be so afraid to speak up or to seek help. It just kind of helps like break away some of that stigma. And as much as we've come pretty far with stigma around mental health or around postpartum concerns, it's still there. And there's still a lot of people that aren't getting help that really could benefit from it simply because, they're concerned about being judged or.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think the one thing that I see a lot in the dynamics is if people can lay out their expectations. You don't know if you're going to have a colicky baby or a gassy baby, or like you can't predict all of those things. But even just like going through the expectations of, am I going to get up with the baby every night? If you have a working partner, if your partner is working, I get up Monday through Friday, and then Friday, Saturday, Sunday, when you're not going to work, you get up with the baby, or things like that. Like even just laying out those little expectations. Um, I've had some partners who have come in and said, I don't do poopy diapers. I will not change a poopy diaper because if I do, I'll throw up. And then I have to clean up my throw up and the baby's diaper. And, not that I'm suggesting that was kind of an extreme case, but they found a way to work around that. Okay, I'll change all the poopy diapers if you do, the feedings or whatever. Right. And so I think it's important for couples just to lay out even some of those even minuscule details of there's going to be bottles to feed and bottles to clean and extra laundry and diapers to change, and who's, yes, it's both of us, but what are sort of the expectations, because some people's expectations can be very different depending on the house they grew up in, if they have experience particularly with newborns and there's a lot of, I shouldn't say a lot, but generally there can be some fear from someone who hasn't experienced a lot of time around small babies of like, I'm going to hurt them, or there's like, what can I do that's, really connecting with them. I have found that a lot of males particularly have sometimes a hard time really bonding. And you probably see this sometimes, maybe even with postpartum depression in women, of bonding with a baby. And so getting that extra support from their partner allows them also space to kind of figure out, what helps me feel connected to this child.
Absolutely. And I really like what you're saying about having those conversations about roles and expectations. That's something that I do with all my pregnant expecting clients, is that we talk about, what is this going to look like when the baby comes? And I encourage them to have conversations with their partner about everything from childcare responsibilities to, who's going to do the grocery shopping, who's going to do the cooking, just really like iron it out, get clear so that everyone's on the same page, but then also be willing to kind of revisit it and rework it and know that shifts are going to have to be made. It's going to be a little bit trial and error, but have kind of a base to work from. Like, you wouldn't start a new business without a business plan. So it's kind of like the business plan for your new family life. It's important to have just a working document that you can then kind of modify as time goes on.
And again, especially if you've been together for a while and you're now transitioning, right? There are going to be routines and habits and things that are no longer going to be the same, because, and you may not predict every single one of them, but having kind of this idea of, okay, let's talk about it before and have this working document to work off of and get really clear on expectations can be incredibly helpful for people as well in navigating the relationship change as well. Speaking of the relationship kind of changing, how can having a new baby impact a relationship?
It's a good question. I mean, it could affect it in so many different ways. Just from the very beginning, from day one, both partners are going to start experiencing feelings about this transition, and couples can kind of get closer together, or sometimes couples can feel like the transition to parenthood is kind of creating more distance in between them. And there's a lot of different factors that can kind of play a role. The research tells us that moms who experience postpartum depression and anxiety often feel more distant from their partners. And those partners are actually at higher risk of experiencing postpartum depression themselves if they're in a relationship or a marriage with a woman who's experiencing it. Intimacy, physical intimacy, emotional intimacy is certainly impacted. I know in a lot of the mothers that I speak with, just a common theme that kind of comes up is that their partners feel ready to resume physical intimacy much sooner than they really feel comfortable. And even when they get the green light to do so from their OBGYN or their midwives, a lot of times they still don't really feel quite physically well or even emotionally ready, or they feel very touched out. And then sometimes partners can feel rejected by that or hurt if their partners aren't wanting that right now. So that's why it's really important to try to have those open and honest conversations with each other. So, feelings aren't hurt or people don't take it personally, but intimacy is a big one. It's probably one of the biggest parts that are impacted.
Yeah, it definitely, I see a lot of the same thing, that intimacy is a huge thing. Emotional intimacy, just time together, right? For even have time in the evenings that we're used to having with just the two of us. And now there's, this third person that is there and in needing us. And as we're having a conversation, we keep getting interrupted by a crying baby or spit up or a changing diaper, or once they become into toddlers, they're, always interrupting you or needing something, or it can be very difficult for people to carve out that individual time of just the relationship again. And intimacy, definitely, having even, again, a roadmap or a plan or an expectation. Typically it's 6 weeks postpartum, we sort of get the green light and we're all okay. And for some women, it's exactly like you're saying. They're not emotionally ready. They feeling like I'm being touched all the time, and I don't. That's the last thing on my mind. That's the last thing that I want to do. And so, having those conversations I have found, aren't going to necessarily just, snap that desire right on, but it can definitely help create understanding for the partner, that the understanding of where they're at. It's not a rejection of me. It's not that she doesn't want me. It's that she's feeling very touched out, and just creating that kind of awareness and truth around what's happening. A lot of couples struggle to talk about that, and try to deal with it by themselves, which actually only makes the problem typically worse.
Yeah, and sometimes I know we're talking a lot about mothers, and we certainly honor that other families go through this, but a lot of times, when mothers don't feel ready to resume physical intimacy, um, they just it's hard. Like they a lot of times they want to be close to their partner, but they just don't have that physical desire right now. Or certainly if they're also breastfeeding as well, um, that can affect their hormones in a way that their libido is pretty low and they don't really have a desire. So finding other ways to emotionally connect, and having those conversations about, how do I feel? How can we feel close with each other? Even if we're not maybe engaging in that right now, or how can we work towards that over time at a pace that everyone's really comfortable with?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And it's a great point that, just having the conversation of what can we do to feel close. And it may not be physical intimacy. It may be, anything along the lines of maybe even just cuddling, maybe sitting next to each other. I have couples that talk about doing chore play, right? That it's like, instead of foreplay, it's like, I see you helping around the house and helping with all these things. And that makes me, really excited about feeling important and feeling wanted and feeling seen and feeling desired. And it helps me be more ready and be able to switch to in that mindset to more of a sexual mindset when it comes, because all of these chores are not always are not also on my checklist or my to-do list as well. So again, and that comes directly from a couple, but that also, like, that came through a conversation of them having it, right? And so them being able to have conversations, and that's what I always encourage couples to have the conversation. And sometimes they don't know where to start the conversation. And so coming to someone like you, or reaching out for marriage therapy, or even support in any way, can really be helpful and impactful for them to just seek support. Because there is a lot of stigma around, well, why can't I do this? Or why can't I be like Jane down the street? Or, comparisons and things like that can really get in the way of people seeking help still.
Yeah. And I think too that sometimes an outside person, an outside therapist, or even if it's a trusted person in your support system, sometimes they can kind of see things a bit differently than we could see it when we're as a person, people that are in the couple and that are actually experiencing it. Sometimes they can kind of point things out or see patterns that we're a little bit blind to. So that's why
Absolutely.
getting the help, if you're having the same kind of issues over and over again, or the same themes are coming up, I always tell people that's kind of a sign that maybe you need a little bit more support.
Yeah, absolutely. So if one partner is experiencing a mental health condition like postpartum depression or anxiety, how does this affect the family coping with this, and the adjustment to parenthood?
It definitely makes it more challenging. Experiencing postpartum depression or anxiety or OCD or PTSD, it makes the whole experience of parenthood even more difficult than it already feels. And then that could trickle down to the couple as well, where especially if the other partner is having trouble understanding what's going on, or there hasn't been a proper diagnosis, it could add a lot of confusion. And sometimes things can be misinterpreted in negative ways, or, things can be assumed that maybe aren't accurate. So I think the key thing is that it just makes it a lot more challenging, and it adds a lot more stress to something that's already extremely stressful.
Absolutely. When you talk about like the signs, like how do people know, what are the signs of postpartum depression? And what should they be looking for if they are maybe suspecting that their partner may be going through some postpartum depression?
So postpartum depression it's kind of like the hallmark term that people use to kind of talk about all the perinatal mood and anxiety disorders, but it's actually one of several of them. Postpartum depression specifically involves a sad mood that lasts pretty much nearly every day for at least 2 weeks. And then there are often other symptoms as well. So a mother experiencing postpartum depression might feel very unmotivated. She might have trouble making decisions, focusing on things. She is probably going to have changes to her sleeping or eating habits. She might be sleeping more or less than usual, very low energy. There might even be changes in the way she kind of like does things or moves around. She might be a little bit more slow than usual. And in more severe cases, she may even be sharing suicidal thoughts, or she may be having them and not sharing them with other people. Postpartum depression is actually the most common maternal mental health condition, which a lot of people think it's postpartum depression, but postpartum anxiety is actually slightly more common. And that's more of a worry or fear that's pretty chronic. So it occurs most days, nearly every day for several weeks. And it's often accompanied by also low energy, difficulty making decisions, difficulty sleeping, a lot of tension, irritability, agitation. There's also postpartum OCD, which is where a woman will experience intrusive thoughts. And in response to those thoughts, she gets a lot of anxiety, and then she engages in behaviors that help kind of alleviate some of that anxiety, but then that anxiety kind of always returns. It's like this vicious cycle. And then PTSD can develop in response if you've experienced a traumatic birth, and that involves anxiety and sadness and a lot of difficulty coping with the traumatic event.
Yeah. So there's not just postpartum depression, but kind of lots of these postnatal experiences that people could go through. So if they find like excessive worrying, but I'm not sad, am I depressed? Like they're experiencing something. They should seek help or seek support, and even be talking to it and their experience with their partner.
Absolutely. Yeah. The baby blues are something a lot of people are familiar with. About 80% of women experience them. And baby blues are a mild sadness or anxiety that usually develops in a couple of days of giving birth, and then it improves over the course of a couple of weeks. The baby blues aren't a mental health condition. If you find that you're continuing to feel that way beyond that first 2 to 3 weeks, then it starts becoming that territory of maybe there's, something more going on. And if at any point your symptoms feel more than mild, they feel more severe, or they're really affecting your life, your ability to function, you really just don't feel like yourself, then that's just a really important indicator. I always tell people, if you're questioning it, if you're thinking this isn't right, I should probably get help, then you should probably get help. It's your body and your mind telling you something.
Yeah. And something's off. Yeah. Something's not normal.
So don't overthink it. If you're not feeling right, and people are telling you, no, it's fine, this is normal, it's the baby blues. If you really know something's not right, like listen to that.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's great. can couples do anything to prepare for this? And even the adjustment period, even any of these things, like, is there anything specific that they could do to adjust for this adjustment before baby comes?
It kind of circles back to what we were talking about a little bit earlier of having that family business plan going into it, having those conversations beforehand. And I mean, you don't have to write it out like a formal business plan. It could be very informal, just discussions. That, in my experience, that helps tremendously. And just both couples kind of getting on the same page and then continuing to revisit that.
Yeah.
I often recommend that couples have a weekly check-in meeting, usually on a Sunday, but it really could be any day of the week where they kind of talk about what that week's going to look like, their expectations, if there's anything out of the norm going on, who's going to do what. But also like a larger quarterly check-in about the relationship and how are we meeting the expectations of our plan, or is one person taking on more of the load, and how are they feeling about that? It's not necessarily a bad thing for one person to be taking on more of the load. It's just, it becomes more problematic when a person's feeling frustrated or resentful about that. But having those conversations of like, how are we both feeling about things, is one of my top recommendations for
Absolutely. Yeah, that's great. I also think, just to add to that as well, is talking about, if I'm noticing something that you're feeling a little sad, or that you're a little bit moodier, or I'm having a difficult time connecting, how do you want me to talk to you about it? Right? Because oftentimes I find people are just like, they start name calling, or they're like, what the heck is wrong with you? And start like, why can't you get over this? Or, you had a baby 3 months ago. What's wrong with you? And so then they start sort of in their own frustration of their need not being met. They then don't support their partner. Right. And so having a conversation, just like you're talking about, that plan of, let's say nothing goes wrong. Great. What's our plan? But what if something does happen? What if I'm noticing something? Do you want me to tell you? Do you want your mom to tell you? Do you want a trusted friend? Like, do you want to have that conversation together? How do you want me to have that conversation with you? Because I'm concerned for you, and I don't want to, get to this frustration point where we then are pulling each other further apart, right? Because I don't want to talk to somebody who's calling me names or telling me I'm weak for not being able to do this, or whatever it might be. And so having a plan before baby even comes. Some women, I found that they're a little more expecting baby blues, postpartum depression, because their sisters have all had it, or my mom had it, or it's a familial thing that I might have it, and so they might be more expecting it a little bit more. And other women are not expecting it at all, and so again, just having that plan, whether you're expecting it or not, can be really, really helpful.
Absolutely. Yeah, I couldn't agree more. It's so important to have those transparent conversations.
Yeah, yeah, very good. We're kind of already talking about this, but what should you do if your partner is really struggling and has postpartum depression or another mental health condition after the baby comes? How do they reach out? What support should they really be looking for? What should they be doing?
Kind of what you suggested, if you've already had some of those conversations before about how to handle something like that, then it's a little bit easier to navigate. But I would definitely suggest educating yourself on postpartum depression, postpartum anxiety, all the different perinatal mood and anxiety disorders. If you're concerned about your partner, familiarize yourself with those things. There's a lot of resources out there. Postpartum Support International is a nonprofit that's a really great organization, and they have a lot of information on their website. Familiarize yourself with what supports are available in your area. So when you are talking to your partner, you can kindly suggest some of these things. Like, they have some local support groups. They have some online support groups. There are some therapists in our area, or that you can see virtually, who treat these conditions. And I would suggest approaching it as more of an observation. Like, I've kind of noticed these things and I'm concerned, versus what you were kind of sharing earlier, where it's, you know, why are you still feeling this way 3 months postpartum, and kind of like that place of frustration and blame or accusation, because anyone who's feeling this way is feeling so vulnerable. So you do have to be very sensitive in how you're bringing these things up. And there's, of course, a tendency to feel like a bad mom or a bad parent if you're experiencing these things. So we want to be really gentle and conscious in how we're approaching it. But if you kind of frame it as an observation and, you know, kind of listen to what they have to say and see if they're open to maybe, you know, speaking to someone or attending a support group. And if you've already researched some of those things and you have them in your back pocket and you can, you know, offer to assist them in setting that up. Sometimes just making the phone call for them with their permission, of course, goes a long way. Like I mentioned, a lot of times I will have fathers reach out on behalf of their wives to schedule the appointment, just because, you know, it's hard for her to make that call. And if he can set everything up and then she can just show up to the appointment, it takes away a lot of barriers.
Yeah. And again, it just shows the support there, and having a plan before, right? Like finding these resources before. It can be really helpful in that I hope we don't need these resources, but here's the plan. If it does, I'm going to, you know, reach out to a few people, or I'm going to make that call with you, or I can sit next to you and while you make the call and I can hold your hand, or I can set the appointment. However you want to do that, having even sort of a plan, and having it be, as you mentioned earlier, a working document, because I might be feeling one way before baby comes. I might be like, I can do it. I can make a phone call. And then no, actually, I don't, that feels so overwhelming. I can't even think of Googling a number right now. I just can't. And so again, allowing that flexibility for yourself to change, as well as the need to, and support that you need from your partner to also change and flex, and not get too rigid in the plan is really a key thing. To have a plan, but don't be too rigid in the plan.
Exactly. Yeah.
Are there any unexpected positive changes that you feel like you see happen in relationships after a baby comes?
A lot of couples do share, you know, I have to say in my practice, I see a lot of couples struggle initially with this transition, but then I do see a lot of couples feel stronger after getting past some of those initial hurdles. Like often they share that first year, and certainly that was my personal experience as well with having children, that first year is so hard and feels like a blur. And when you kind of get past that and you have some of the kinks worked out in your relationship and how you run your household, and you feel a little bit more confident as a parent, it really can draw you closer together, and you feel like you kind of have your groove back. So I think there's definitely a lot of room for positive changes too. You know, and I'm sure you're familiar with this as specializing in working with couples and families, that it's really common for marital dissatisfaction to increase after having children, and it kind of follows a U-shaped curve, and it increases again as children get older and as they leave the nest. That's a common experience that the research has found, but it certainly doesn't have to be that way for everybody. And there can be a lot of joy in that process, even if the curve is a bit U-shaped. There can be a lot of positive, beautiful, wonderful moments. So I definitely think there's a lot of room for positivity.
Yes, I think it's like doing a bike race or something, and we're racing together and we're having a good time, and then we hit this like mud pit, and we sort of go through this mud pit, and we can have fun in the mud pit. We can throw mud balls at each other, and we can have fun and enjoy it while we're there. But it's hard to slog through that mud, and then you get out of the mud pit and you can keep going just as you were before. But it does take some time. I mean, those little infants are very, very needy they're completely dependent on another human being for a number of years, really, before they're off doing their own and can be a little bit more independent. And it very much is draining emotionally, physically, and even that physical drain getting in the way of physical intimacy as well on a relationship. And so many of the things that we've already talked about, having a plan in place and talking about it can be really helpful. But I highly encourage my couples, especially the ones that are in the less than 2 phase, if they have a baby less than 2, to find even just 2 hours to spend together by themselves, no baby, and try to do that as often as and frequently as they can within reason, right? Once a week, things like that, of really spending time together where there's not those interruptions, to really help keep that relationship strong, and making that a priority can be really helpful in getting through those what feels like kind of mud bog times.
Yeah. And I think John and Julie Gottman talk a lot about that in their work too, and the importance of having a strong foundation for that house
Yeah.
to stay supported. So yeah, it's very, very important to do that.
Yep. And it's those again, kids need all of the things that we as adults need and we need in our partnership. And so it can be very draining in many ways, or take an additional away from the relationship, and it's another relationship that needs nurtured. And it can be very challenging for relationships, but it can also be very beautiful. And many people experience a lot of happiness in being able to navigate those, of like, okay, we made it through the mud, like, look at what we did, we did this and we did it together. And that teamwork feeling, as you mentioned, that U-shaped curve as you come up on that other side of it, really feels like we did this and we did it together, and look at what we've accomplished.
Yeah, it's kind of like, to go with your bike riding analogy, it's like running a marathon. You know that it's going to feel good at the end, but that run is really, really tough.
Absolutely. Yeah. What are the first steps you recommend couples take when they start to feel disconnected post baby?
The first thing I would really suggest is to take a step back and reflect on it, and then have that open conversation, and share that with your partner. And again, not in a way of you're doing this, or you're ignoring me, or you're making me feel this way, but to say, I've been kind of noticing X, Y, or Z, and I wanted to bring this to your attention. Can we talk about it? And see if that person's also feeling similarly, and then kind of brainstorm together, how can we work through this? What can we do? How can we enhance our intimacy or emotional intimacy, feel closer together? And if you do feel like the same types of conflicts, same themes are coming up, I really feel like that's a good indicator that you really could benefit from a third party to come in and provide some more feedback and support. Because you might just be having trouble kind of navigating that together. It just might really help to have that third person that can provide some fresh eyes and offer some perspective.
Absolutely. When we're talking about physical intimacy specifically, sometimes we get stuck in those ruts, and it's hard to talk about, and I don't know how to talk about the change. And so bringing in a third party that you both can trust, that you both feel like you can talk to, that you can be open with, and you can share, that can be incredibly beneficial on navigating that part of your relationship as well. Is there anything else that you would suggest, like particularly for the physical intimacy part, that you suggest or you find helpful for couples?
I think having the open dialogue is key, and understanding, trying to express what's really kind of like what's going on for you. That, I mean, I guess it kind of depends on what is impacting the physical intimacy, but I'm thinking about a lot of the moms that I work with, and often a common theme that comes up is this lack of desire to be intimate with their partners, or not specifically with their partners, but just in general, just not having that desire for intimacy, and just that feeling touched out, and the mental load that they're carrying. And sometimes it's hard to really identify what those different pieces are. But if you can take some time to reflect, or you can speak with a therapist or a trusted person that can help you kind of identify what that is, so that you can let your partner know, like, listen, I don't want to be intimate at the end of the night because I'm physically exhausted, or I know that the baby is going to be waking up in 3 hours, and it just doesn't put me in the mood to know that I'm going to get interrupted sleep all night. Um, and then you two can kind of talk about, is there a way that your partner can assist you with that? Is there a little bit of load that they could take off of you? But it takes that kind of awareness to know that that's what's going on. Often it's like you just don't want to do it, and it's hard to identify anything beyond that. So if you can really identify what actually the reasons are, and you can really get clear, it's a little bit easier to express that to your partner, and then to kind of search for a solution together.
Right, right. And I've also found it to be willing to what is comfortable, right? Like what can I do, right? And be willing to be flexible in what does feel doable for me. In that, if we have, again, we're talking a lot about mothers here, but there's lots of people who experience this. But if you're experiencing this and feeling sort of touched out, or I don't want to be intimate at the end of the night because baby's going to wake up in 3 hours, and coming up with a plan of being able to be flexible of what would work, right? Because oftentimes I get this stuck, well, nothing's going to work, I just don't want to do it at all. Like it's not on my radar, I don't want it. And so their inability to be flexible of when it might work, or be open to when could we fit some time in together, or to be together with just us, can be really helpful and encouraging to a partner, rather than completely rejecting and completely like, I don't even know when this is ever going to happen again, or if you're ever going to want to be with me again. And so that can be really helpful, of helping them just be a little bit open, right? They're frustrated themselves that I don't want to be intimate and you keep wanting intimacy. And how do I also say, okay, what am I willing to do? What am I willing to, can we cuddle at night? Is there ways that we can be sexually intimate that I am comfortable with? Because they just get that kind of block of like all or nothing thinking, because of the overwhelm of everything else going on as well.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. Great. What can you suggest, or can you suggest any strategies for managing conflict or resentment that might arise during these transitions, right? In this, for this question specifically, I've had a few clients who, particularly the fathers, end up resenting the children for a time because you're always taking mom's time, or you're consuming my partner's time and there's no time for me. And so some resentment can come up there. And resentment can also arise in the other way of like, well, you're always going out and doing work, and you get out of the house all the time and I'm stuck here, right? And so there's lots of other ways too. Those are not the only ways, but kind of resentment can kind of pop up. Any tips you have for sort of handling resentment specifically in relationships?
Conversations about the load that each person is carrying, and specifically how each person feels about their bulk of the load is really important, before things kind of bubble over into resentment. If you feel that brewing, if you feel that frustration, you feel like your partner is always giving attention to the kids and not to you, and you notice you're getting increasingly bothered by that, bringing it up before it becomes full-blown resentment is probably going to be a more productive conversation. And again, approaching it not in the way of you never pay attention to me, like really watching the words that we use, that you never, or you don't do this, you don't do that. The more that I feel I've been noticing, that can really help lower the other person's defenses, that they're more likely to take it in. And having those conversations when you're not in an overstimulated moment, or you're not arguing about something else, having them appropriately timed to can increase the likelihood that there'll be productive conversations.
Absolutely. That's a common error that I find is like, oh, we don't talk about it until right in the moment. And we're both frustrated and upset and feeling, all the feels and feeling super overwhelmed. And then we start talking about it and our defenses immediately go up because it's like, well, you never do this. Well, you don't do this. And well, if you would do that, then I wouldn't do. And then we get defensive and we attack each other and get really critical. And then those conversations don't go well, and no one really gets hurt in those moments. And so I always am encouraging people to have, again, sort of pre-conversations of like, okay, that didn't go well, can we talk about how that went today? And that didn't go so well for me, and here's what went wrong, and here's what I noticed, and here's what I'm feeling. And then you have time out of the emotion of it, time to revisit it, time to get clarity for yourself of why didn't that go well for me? What was I expecting? What did I need differently? Do I have any ideas of how we could do it different? And presenting that in a way rather than a super attacking way, right? It's more of an open, like, let's discuss this. And so whether that's post or even, pre, where we've got a stressful thing coming up today, or we've got this event, or we've got something going on, or it's just a random Tuesday and this happened, or this is going to happen. Can we talk about expectations before we get there so that we can make sure that we are doing it together? Can be game changers, game changing conversations for so many couples.
Yes, absolutely. A lot of the communication skills that we use with our little ones work well with our partners as well. Feelings, I statements, all of those things. They really go a long way when they're practiced.
They really do. We think adults can handle a lot more, or we don't need to talk to them like we talk to our little ones, or use softer voices, or they can handle it. This is just the way we talk to each other. But it's really important to go back to those basics of just basic communication, of showing respect and love for each other, especially in really stressful moments like raising a baby or transitioning to having a baby in your family can be really stressful. Any practical everyday actions that couples can take to strengthen their relationship post-baby?
I'm a big fan of trying to tap into your partner's love language and trying to provide for that love language in some way on a daily basis. So, if you're, for example, I'm definitely an acts of service. That's how I receive love. So my partner is pretty diligent about trying to incorporate that into our routine every day. And if your partner really appreciates praise or some verbal affirmation, really making that conscious effort to offer that, and then that kind of builds over time, and it fills that person's cup up. It's when your cup is constantly depleted, it's really hard to show up as your best self in that relationship. So if you can kind of make deposits, if you will, every day into your partner's emotional bank account, that compound interest will just keep growing. Yeah. So I think that would be my number one recommendation.
Yeah, absolutely. That's a great recommendation. And love languages is a common thing that most people have heard about. And if you haven't, it's a great thing to explore a little bit more. But just ways to kind of show up for your partner. Let them know that you appreciate them, that you see them, that you are thinking of them. Little daily things on it can be very simple things. Even I have found as sort of rituals of like, when you leave the house, I acknowledge that you're leaving, and when you come home, I acknowledge that you've come home. It can be simple things like that. It doesn't have to be these grand, I've got to buy you flowers every day and bring home your favorite treat or whatever. It doesn't have to be grand things. It can be simple things of ways that you're showing up for your partner. Can be incredibly helpful in any time in your relationship, but particularly in these more stressful times can be really key. How can couples ensure that both partners' needs are being met during the transition of parenthood? Going right along with what we kind of were just talking about, but how do we also make sure that our own needs are being met?
Well, it's really important to advocate for our needs to our partners and to let them know if we feel like our emotional bank accounts or our balance is running low or we're being overdrawn, to let them know that, again, in a way that's respectful of their feelings and comes from that place of I've been feeling this way rather than the you that we've been talking about throughout this conversation. And maybe offering them some suggestions too of ways that they can offer you that. Like I've been feeling like I really miss our time together. Here's some ideas about ways that we can try to prioritize that time, offering some suggestions instead of kind of like stating the problem and then
And then
feeling like
leave.
you're just stuck
Well,
in
you
this
never
problem
come down to
together.
me anymore. Well, okay. Well,
Yeah.
I don't have time to spend with you. So yeah, I think coming up with suggestions or being able to be really clear as to what your needs are, right? If it's I need more time with you, it's being able to say I want to spend more time with you. And again, always in the presentation of it, right? In that you never spend time with me is very different than I really want to spend more time with you, right? There's a almost automatic defenses go up versus there's a more open, like, oh, of course I want to like lean into you. I want to give you a hug. I want to say, oh, I miss you too, instead of, well, what are all the things that you're not doing, right? Like
Yeah.
there's a clear defensiveness that gets ignited when we are critical or attacking. So those I statements are really really key as well. Any can you share any exercises or routines that help couples stay connected emotionally during times like this, transitional times?
I really like the idea of expressing gratitude towards each other on a regular basis. So I'll share kind of a personal exercise that my husband and I do together every night. Is we both express three things that we're grateful for that occurred throughout the day, and then at least one piece of that is a gratitude towards each other. And that little appreciation, that little expression, I feel like for me that just fills up my cup, and I think it does for him as well. That kind of carries us over to the next day. But I mean, I would suggest that exercise for other people, but I think also, try different things and see what works for the both of you, because every couple is different. And for some people that would sound super cheesy or awkward, but there might be other ways that you can express gratitude or appreciation or love to each other that might feel more natural to you. Just be open to trying different things, I think is the most important thing.
Absolutely, absolutely. And again, what one couple does isn't going to necessarily feel comfortable for another couple. So just because, we've suggested something, or your therapist has suggested something, or your friend suggests something and that doesn't work for your relationship, continue to be open. I would definitely echo those sentiments of be open to what does work for you. What do you need to help really stay emotionally connected? Maybe it's a set aside time to have conversations, not conversations about the kids or work or things like that, but just conversations about how are you really doing? How are you feeling? How are you doing right now with all of this weight and overwhelm? And really checking in with each other and having intentional conversations, I think, is really really important.
Yeah, really making that person feel seen.
Yes,
Because in my experience with the adjustments to parenthood and postpartum, both personally and in my work with clients, there's this common theme of feeling kind of invisible. Like you just feel like you're so entrenched in raising little kids and you're so busy and you're so overwhelmed and the mental load is exhausting that you don't always feel seen. So seeing your partner in little ways, little acknowledgments here and there, it really can go a long way.
absolutely. And I think that's a very key point. And just the acknowledgement can be really really helpful and help your partner feel seen, and that can happen in lots of different ways. A couple other questions here before we wrap up and pick your brain a little bit more. But how can couples create a balanced environment at home that supports both of their relationship and their new child?
A lot of the things that we've been talking about with communicating openly with each other, having conversations before you hit the point of extreme anger or resentment, having those proactive conversations rather than reactive, not stuffing these things away. So not brushing them under the rug, pretending that they don't exist. We all know that those feelings are just going to build and build and build, and they're not good for your mental health or the health of your relationship. So having those conversations at the right time is really the most important, in my opinion, one of the most important things to have a balanced household. Because you have to, if you're a household, if you think of it like a house, like you need that foundation, that relationship foundation to be really strong. So it requires a good foundation to begin with, and then it requires regular maintenance to keep it really strong. So you are going to have to make it a priority and carve out the time. It's probably going to be a lot more challenging than it was pre-children to keep that foundation strong. You have to be kind of strategic about really carving out that time.
Could not agree more. And it's unfortunate. I've worked with a few couples that have had, I mentioned earlier that you kind of get stuck in these ruts and routines early on, right? Like they had kids relatively early in their marriage, and they've been together now 20 years, and things that they felt 20 years ago, 15 years ago when they first had kids and felt invisible and unseen have now grown for 15, 20 years. And we're trying to navigate those unseen feelings from 15 years ago, and that have continued to be added to or grown over those 15 years. And it becomes really difficult for couples to really navigate that, and really hard to I think that's where a lot of people then question, well, this has been happening for so long, maybe divorce is better. They don't have small children anymore. Those children are being raised, but do we separate for the kids? Can we make this work? And a lot of those could be avoided by having open, honest conversations early on and any transitional point, right? Whether that's after a move for work or after a baby comes in, and transitional moments is often where we see a lot of hurts happen. And I would highly encourage couples to continue to check in with each other and see how these transitions are really going, and having those open conversations is key.
It's hard to do. It's hard to make the time. It's hard to make it a priority. It's just it's not going to be easy, but like you said, waiting 20 years, 30 years when there's then so much more to unravel, it's a lot harder long term.
It definitely is a lot harder. And so I found that sometimes people don't want to, well, he's already so busy, or he's already, we just made a move, or we just, had a baby, and there's so much going on and it feels so chaotic that I don't want to add one more, like, oh, this isn't really quite going well for me. I don't want to add one more thing to my partner's plate. All done out of a really great love and respect. And I don't want to overburden them, and I don't want to make things worse, and done at a great detriment, because if I'm not able to express that to my partner and be seen by my partner, then again, we can go years with growing resentment or feelings of hurt that don't get addressed early on, particularly in transitional periods like this that can be really devastating to relationships.
It's easier to do the hard work now.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So if you are questioning if this is sounding like you and is sounding like, oh, this is me, but how do I have those conversations, right? Reach out, get support. And we're going to talk a little bit more. We're going to end with some resources and support and how to get those and where to look for them, and how to know if I really do need to reach out to someone. So how can external support like family and professional counseling benefit couples during this transition?
It could benefit them both individually and as a couple. So if one specific partner in the relationship is having trouble with the adjustment to parenthood, or is experiencing a perinatal mental health condition, getting therapy, getting support, attending a support group can help them address those symptoms, which in turn indirectly is going to help the relationship as well. And if the couple is struggling together and you find that you're not really able to resolve conflicts in a healthy way together, or the same conflicts keep coming up and you're not able to get past them in a constructive way, then seeking out couples or family therapy or counseling and having that third party observer who's trained to kind of identify these patterns and help you navigate them and introduce you to different ways to communicate. It can really be just a game changer. And in my experience, those two in conjunction, individual therapy, partners being in individual therapy themselves and in couples therapy together, is a really powerful combination. It sounds like a lot. It sounds like a big time commitment, but it doesn't have to be forever. It could be, it could be just a couple sessions to get some things sorted out. It could be a several sessions for a couple weeks, and then maybe meeting infrequently. I mean, every person's needs are different, but doing the work now, investing the time and the energy, is only gonna benefit you in the short term, because not dealing with these things long term is just gonna make it that much more difficult, and then it's gonna require more time and energy to address these problems down the road.
Yes, absolutely. Couldn't agree more. And again, these transitional moments are really, there's a lot going on for each partner. So individual therapy absolutely can be a really beneficial thing. And also in conjunction, couples therapy. And like you mentioned, it doesn't have to be a forever thing. That can be a like, okay, you go to therapy this week, I'll go next week, and then we go together the third week. Like, there's lots of variable, tons of different combinations that you can come up with that can be really helpful, because these transitional moments can be big, and both partners need their individual support as well as the relationship needs support together. And so what you've suggested is really great. What resources do you commonly recommend to new parents struggling with their relationship?
I found Karen Kleinman's books really helpful. I don't know if you're familiar with her.
I'm not familiar with it.
She's a therapist and the owner of the Postpartum Stress Center, but she's written several books, some on postpartum depression, and then she has one that helps kind of explain how partners can experience postpartum depression and how to navigate that as a couple. So some of her books can be really, really eye-opening and beneficial. And I've also really found John Gottman's work on couples and the transition to parenthood to be quite helpful for my clients, and specifically the bringing baby home workshop that couples can take while they're expecting. I think it's a 2-day workshop that really goes in depth on how to prepare for that transition, and does a lot of the proactive preventative stuff that we've talked about today. Can help the couple do that in the moment with a facilitator there, and doing different exercises. And the research shows that it helps couples feel more satisfied with the transition, and it's actually associated with lower risk of postpartum depression. So it can be quite helpful.
Yes. John Gottman has done a lot of really great work in this area, and I very much support the work that he has done. It's really fantastic, and I really appreciate his work. Can find it very, very helpful for many couples. How can friends and extended family best support new parents in maintaining a healthy relationship?
Providing the opportunity for them to have the time to spend together is something that a lot of the couples that I work with need and ask for from family and friends. That if they can provide assistance with childcare or taking some of the mental load off at home, then that just kind of frees up some space for the couple to spend quality time together and take date nights and things like that. And I think it's also important to note that sometimes couples or one partner doesn't really feel ready to take date nights right away, or to have someone else watch the baby. So offering that to couples, but not pressuring them, kind of knowing that they'll say yes at the pace that they feel comfortable with, but letting them know that that's an option, and that's something that you're willing to help with, can be really valuable.
Yes, I love that you're saying don't pressure them, because there are many people who just don't feel comfortable leaving their baby. And And I've had, on the other hand, mother-in-laws come in and say like, well, my daughter-in-law just doesn't trust me. And I've offered so many times to help watch their baby or things like that, and she just doesn't trust me. And then she ends up taking it personally, and then it gets in the way of their relationship and things like that. And so I think it's really important that, you know, if you find yourself as a mother-in-law in a situation like this, that you are there for support and are offering support, but you're not forcing support. And when they are ready, they will take that step, because there are many women who are not ready to take those steps, and they don't want to be away from their baby for even an hour. And so it just offering, but not being offended if they don't take you up on that offer, is really important to know and remember as family and friends who are supporting these transitions.
Yeah, it's not always personal.
Yes.
I mean, sometimes maybe it is. Sometimes maybe in some cases they don't trust you, but a lot of times, it is hard to get comfortable with that idea of someone else watching your baby or being away from the house, and it takes time to.
Yeah. And even the negative connotations or the negative thought patterns that moms can get in of like, I'm leaving my baby, I'm a bad mom, or this is the first time I've left my baby and I'm not going to be there for him and I'm going to miss something. And like, there's a whole lot of like, again, the postpartum anxiety that you talked about that is very real for a lot of women, and experience it on a different basis than, you did, or your mother did, or your siblings did, or your, neighbor or friend, or those sort of things. And so just, again, supportive but not pushy, and because
I
it's
like
all
that. Supportive but not pushy.
yeah, supportive but not pushy. Good. Any last parting like words of wisdom or things that you think are really important for people to know who are either beginning this prenatal journey, or just about to embark on kind of the postpartum part of this as well?
My biggest takeaway message that I'd like to leave is that it is a transitional phase. It's a journey. It's not something that happens overnight. You're not going to come home with the baby and day one feel like you got everything in control, that you figured out your relationship, that you've navigated the household. It does take time to adjust to all those things. And I think there's a lot of, just in our culture, there's a lot of pressure around quick fixes and we want results right away. And this is something that really, it's really a phase, it's a journey. And the more we can make peace with that, the easier it's going to be. If we try to resist it, we want these quick fixes, we're going to end up really, really frustrated. So just remembering that, and expecting that it's going to take time. And it's also a developmental phase for us just on a personal level. A lot of the experts talk about matrescence, which sounds a lot like adolescence. And this idea is that becoming a mother, it's this developmental stage. It's this emotional upheaval. It's this new identity, new roles. So we just kind of have to understand and expect that there's going to be some of that in this journey.
Yeah. And I think, depending on the cultural experiences that you have, it's important to know that we live as far as in a European, white, mostly European nation that is about progress and about, getting back to work or getting up and moving, and, you have a baby and life goes on. And yes, there are some cultures that are that way, and there are other cultures who take maternity leaves are 2 years, after you have a baby, right? And so you may not be able to take 2 years, but knowing that there's these transitional times, it is not, as you said, very beautifully pointed out, is not going to happen overnight. It is a transitional period, and cultural influences can also influence what I expect, what I need, what I'm hoping for, what feels supportive, what feels like too much pressure. All of those things are part of this transition, and I loved the like upheaval of emotions and all of those things, because it is very much a transition. It's everything that I've known sort of being shaken and taking on this new identity. And that is not going to happen. Adolescence doesn't happen overnight. We shouldn't expect this transition to motherhood or parenthood for either parent to happen overnight, and that it takes time, and giving ourselves grace in that, as well as our partner in that is really, really great. Yeah. Well, Emily, you've been fantastic. Thank you so much for sharing with this. I think take-home messages from this for listeners is definitely talk about it, have open communication about it, and if you are experiencing feeling off in any sort of way, seek help. Whether that be from your partner, who then you are able to address whether or not you need additional outside help and resources. And if you do, there are outside resources that can help you, whether it be as a couple or whether it be individually. There's stuff virtually online. Emily is in South Carolina and Florida and New York, so she's the kind of all over the place virtually as well. So if you live in any of those states, make sure you're reaching out to her. And again, there's therapists in your communities. There's if you don't feel comfortable seeking their help, there's also the help of your OBGYN that might be able to help point you to good resources in your community to help you find resources to go through this very big transitional period. Open communication, talking in your relationship, staying close in your relationship is not easy, but it is definitely worth it in the end. And you can have as good, and if not better, relationship after these transitional periods, if you stick with it. And so thank you for all of your insights today, Emily, and helping relationships really transition beautifully through phases like this. And it is possible. Hard. It can be very hard and challenging, and also very possible. So thank you for joining us, and thank you for listening to the Puzzle of Us podcast, and we'll catch you next time on our next week's episode.